What can I get for you folks this evening?
I think I'll have the chicken pad thai mild, please.
Okay, and for you, sir?
I'll have the same.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, how was work today?
Well, actually, it was hilarious. We had a group of us that went into the
Oh boy, another hilarious work story. I wonder if she'll stop telling it if I just start laughing right now. That's a novel idea. Wow, where did we go wrong? We used to be happy like that. I used to pull out her chair and open doors for her. I'm not the only one who's been drifting here. Maybe we should have gone to premarital counseling like she wanted to, and I should have ignored Dad when he said counseling was for people who don't know how to solve their own problems. Maybe I should have kept putting time into her hobbies rather than talking to the guys at work about building the ideal man cave. Every one of those guys is divorced. And I guess I really should have listened to the pastor all those years when he preached about prioritizing our marriages above our kids. Now I drop everything to go visit them at college, but I can barely handle going out to eat with my own wife. I ought to warn that kid right now. Just because I listen to all the wrong advice doesn't mean... who am I kidding? I'll just keep on doing what I do. And hopefully, we won't end up divorced.
that we had today. Isn't that funny?
Sure, hon.
Well, what is up, Northridge Church? It is great to be here today, whether you're watching from one of our campuses at Webster and Greece or Rondecoit, or those of you who are watching online. I want to welcome you. I want to thank our Webster and Greece campus. Last week I had a chance to hang out with them. It was amazing. God is up to some big things at our campuses, so I want to encourage you guys. If you're a guest with us, we're just honored to have you here today. We're excited that you're here with us today. We hope you feel loved and cared for, and we're just grateful that you have chosen to worship with us. You know, when I was in college, one of the things my buddies and I like to do, especially around the Halloween seasons, we like to go to places that were haunted. And one year we heard of this place called The Hill. And the story behind The Hill was this idea that there was this school bus going down this hill. It was filled with a football team. They just won a huge victory. They were celebrating. They were pretty boisterous. And on their way home, they were going down this hill that came to an intersection. And at the intersection was a stop sign, and it was a T. And over the guardrail was this huge cliff. And so the football team is celebrating. They're having a great time. They're coming home, and their bus driver fell asleep, and they ended up plowing through the guardrail and going over the cliff, and everyone died. And the story behind this hill is that any car that comes near this guardrail, the football team resides, and it will push any vehicle or any person coming close to that T. And so we heard about this. We thought, man, this would be awesome if this was real. So me and my buddies, we jumped into a car and we decided we were going to go check it out. And so I got in my car and we were driving down. We came down this pretty steep hill and we came to this stop sign at this T where you could see this lofty cliff and this lofty drop. And so before I knew it, I stopped at the stop sign, and remember, I'm facing downward, and I put my car in neutral, and I expect my car to kind of slowly drift forward. But before I could even think, my car begins to drift backwards up this hill. There's that moment where, you know, the hair on your arm begins to stand, and I'm looking at my buddies, and I'm like, what's happening, guys? Like, what's going on? And, you know, I wouldn't want to admit this, but I was about to pee my pants. Like, I was that scared. Like, what is going on? And so we finally wind back up to the point of the hill where my vehicle stops. And I look at them, and everybody's kind of just like, what just happened? And I was like, you want to do it again? And so I pull my car down and we come to the T and we're like, maybe this was just a crazy thing. And I put my car in neutral and before I know it, again, my car is going backwards up this hill. We're kind of in shock. We don't believe it. And I don't know what it was, but something just felt weird about the situation. Well, duh, Drew, obviously your car shouldn't go backwards up the hill, downhill. But something just felt weird. And so I pulled my car off to the side of the road or the part of the hill where it wouldn't go anywhere. And all my buddies, we got out and we started walking down this hill. And what was interesting is as I'm walking downhill, it feels almost as if I'm walking uphill. There's this force, it's like there's this resistance. For every step I take forward, I'm being pushed backwards. But it doesn't feel like haunted, it feels like science. Like something is going on here in the earth that isn't natural. And so we jumped on our phones and we Googled it, and there's this gravitational pull somehow in this atmospheric something. I didn't really understand it all. I knew it just wasn't haunted. But there was this force pushing this part of the earth. It was crazy. But I bet some of us have probably felt like that at some points in our life, where we feel like maybe God is nudging us to take a step of faith. And when we feel like we're getting ready to take that step, it almost feels like something or some force or some resistance is pushing us backwards. You see, if you haven't been with us last week, we jumped into this brand new series called Ferocious Faith, where we're talking about faith. Faith that conquers, faith that has the power to overcome some of our limitations. In week 1, we talked about a battle that every single one of us face. It's the battle of our insecurities. We all have insecurities, but yet through who God is, we can overcome those insecurities. But today we're going to talk about that moment in life where you feel like God's calling you to take that step of faith, but you encounter resistance. If you have your Bibles, 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to start in verse 20. But before we jump into the text, I want to give you kind of just a broad perspective of what's going on in this story. You see, there's two nations at war here. The nation of Israel and the nation of the Philistines. And so they're camped in the midst of this valley, one nation on each side. And every day they march to the middle, they face each other, and out steps this giant. His name's Goliath, and he offers this challenge to the entire nation of Israel. He says, hey, you pick your best warrior. He fights me, winner takes all. And the entire nation of Israel, because Goliath isn't your average man. He's about 10 feet tall. He's a giant. He's a monster. And the entire nation of Israel is trembling like, what are we going to do? But we actually pick up this story away from the battle with a young man who's not old enough to fight in the army. His name's David. He's with his father as a shepherd, and we pick it up in verse 20. It says, early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of the supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled with him in great fear. So here is David, this young boy, and we know from Numbers that you had to be at least 20 years old to fight in the army. And so we know David is not 20 years old. He's younger than that because he's not in the army. In fact, his dad, Jesse, tells him to go take supplies to the battle. He probably took bread and cheese to feed the warriors. And so David quickly, as a young boy who probably wants to be in the battle but isn't old enough, kind of hoping like, oh, any chance I get to go, I'm going. And so he takes the supplies to the keeper of the supplies, and he hurries to the battle to check on his brothers. And as David is talking with his brothers, out steps Goliath, and he utters his usual defiance. He challenges Israel, and not only just Israel, but the God of Israel. And David, as a young man, you can almost see his faith spark as he hears Goliath defy his God. Just like a young man, you could almost see him clenching his fists like no one talks about my God. And you see David's faith beginning to slowly grow as he hears Goliath. And he looks around him and he sees all of Israel running in fear. And he's like, why won't somebody step out and fight this guy? Maybe we've been there before. Maybe a circumstance where we just feel like God is nudging us to take a step of faith. Maybe it's to give financially. Maybe it's to serve in a local church. Maybe it's to share your faith, where you feel like God is just kind of urging you to take that step. You see, David is in this moment where he's looking at Goliath and he feels like God is asking him to take that step. And so he begins to ask questions. Verse 26, it says this, David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, they burned with anger at him and said, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down here only to watch the battle. And so as David's faith is slowly growing, he begins to talk about, maybe I should fight this warrior. What will happen if I win? What's the reward? And he begins to ask questions, and his oldest brother, Eliab, is kind of listening to David kind of talk, and like any older brother, he kind of rolls his eyes at David, and he says, David, hold on a second. You're not even old enough to fight in this war. Don't you have a couple sheep back at home that you need to take care of? Like, David, like, you're just a boy. Get out of here. Go home. I know how conceited you are. Like, get out of here, David. You don't belong here. You're not old enough. You're not strong enough to fight in this battle. And here comes in this moment of David's faith where he encounters that resistance. And I want you to understand something today. When you feel like God is leading you to take a step of faith, you got to understand faith always battles resistance. There won't be a time in your life where God is pushing you and nudging you and you won't encounter something, some form or force pushing you back saying you shouldn't do that. And here David is, and it comes from his own brother. His own brother's like, David, you need to get out of here. And what I found to be true for most Christians today is this right here is where our faith dies. The moment where we feel like God is telling us to do something, but the moment it gets difficult, the moment where we got to push through some adversity, we got to push through some resistance, we kind of just like, whoa, I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And this is where our faith dies. You see, for most of us, we would have been like, you know what? You're right, I'm not old enough to fight this battle. I got sheep I need to take care of, and for most of us, we would have just walked away right here saying, you know what, God can use somebody else. I'll go take care of my sheep. For a lot of Christians, the moment we encounter resistance in our faith, it's where it dies. But for David, this sparked his faith. In fact, it pushed him to say, I want to fight this giant. I'm ready to fight this giant. In fact, word spreads that David is willing to fight Goliath, and before he knows it, he's standing before the guy who's going to choose who's going to fight the battle, King Saul. And look what David says to King Saul. It says this, it says, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on the account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. So David, his faith is actually growing in the midst of resistance. And he's like, I'll fight it. And he's standing before King Saul, and he's like, hey, don't worry anymore. I know everybody else is afraid. I know everybody's scared of this giant, but I'll fight him. And you got to imagine, Saul is looking at this boy. And you wonder if Saul just kind of like giggled, like, David, I appreciate your passion, man. I appreciate you, David. I love that you want to fight him. But David, look at the facts. You're a boy. You're a boy, David. Most scholars believe David was from the age of 12 to 15. You're a boy, David. Here's the facts. You can't even shave yet, David. You're a boy. Look at Goliath. He's a giant. He's a warrior. He's undefeated. He's killed more men than you've interacted with, David. Look at the facts, Saul says. And Saul kind of lays out this picture, David. Look around you. You're a boy. He's a warrior. You're weak. He's strong. You've never fought in a battle. He's won every battle. Look at the facts, David. He lays out the facts. He lays out the truth to feed him the lie. David, you are not able. And that's exactly what resistance will do to you today, is resistance will serve you the truth to get you to buy the lie. And I'm afraid today, we as Christians today have bought into that lie. You see, I believe this today. I believe some of you in your life right now are facing giants. Maybe today your giant is your marriage. And you're looking at the facts and you're saying, you don't understand, Drew. He or she cheated on me. We've been broken for a long time, and you've bought into the lie that it can't be fixed. Maybe today your giant is your finances. Where you're saying, Drew, you don't get it. I'm in debt out of my eyeballs. We spend more money than we take in. And you got to understand, here are the facts, Drew. It can't be fixed. Maybe it's your kids. They've walked away from Jesus, and you're saying, Drew, you don't get it. They're in such bad things. They'll never come back. Maybe it's an addiction for you today. I've been involved with this for 10 years, Drew. You don't get it. It's a part of who I am. I'll never be the same. We've got a giant in our life, and because of the facts, we look at the facts that says my marriage is broken, my finances can't be fixed, and we look at the facts and we come to the conclusion that it's impossible. I've been there. You see, when I was growing up, I loved Michael Jordan. He was my man. I wanted to be like Mike. I remember for one Christmas, I got this gift. It was like this stuffed Nerf basketball hoop that you could put on your closet, and I would play the Space Jam soundtrack, and I would sing, I believe I can fly. And I would slam it so hard on that thing. And I told myself when I was a little boy that I would play college basketball. The problem is, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, it's not funny, okay? I'm not the tallest guy in the house. In fact, usually when my wife's in the room, she's taller than I am. We'll go back to insecurities week 1, right? But I remember telling my friends, my coaches in junior high and high school, I remember meeting with scouts, college scouts. Every single one of them said, Drew, you're a great basketball player. You're just too short. It's not going to happen. And here David is in this moment where Saul's laying out the facts. David, you're too small. David, you're a boy. He's a warrior. You are not able. And I love how David responds to this. Because most of us, again, here's where our faith dies. You're right. We can't win. But look what David says. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair. I struck it and I killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. Man, if that doesn't fire you up today, you might want to check your pulse. Because David looks back at the king and he's like, I get the facts. I get that I'm a boy and he's a warrior. I get it. But let me tell you something. I'm a shepherd. And what David does in this moment, the first thing he does is he remembers. And can I tell you, there is power as Christians is in looking back and seeing how God has already given you victory, how God gave you victory in the past. And that's exactly what David does. He looks in the past, he says, Saul, you don't understand. I'm a shepherd. And when I was watching my sheep, a bear and a lion came and it took one of my sheep. And you know what? I went and I killed that bear and I killed that lion. And what David does in this moment is he remembers the victories that God had given him over previous giants, and he realizes that God will give him the same victory facing this giant today. You see, remember, we need to remember what God did yesterday, and it should fuel our yes today. Some of us who are facing giants that are so big, we got to look back in our past of previous giants and say, man, God gave me victory there, and he'll surely give me victory today. But the second thing David does is something I think we've lost the art of as Christians. David says when a lion or a bear. Now, I don't know about you, but I probably don't ever want to interact with a lion or a bear in the wild. It's not like on my bucket list, like, hey, I want to wrestle a lion or a bear. No. Some of you hunters are like, I'd like to see one in the wild with my gun, but let's be honest. These are animals that are large, they're strong, they would tear us to pieces. And here David remembers this time where he was watching his sheep, and a lion got one sheep, just one. And for most of us, we would kind of just admit today that, hey, you know what, I'll sacrifice one sheep for the health of the herd. You know what, lion, enjoy your steak, just leave us alone. But David doesn't. He says this, he says, you know what, when I saw that lion take one of my sheep, I went after it. I went after it, I pursued it. And can I tell you today, faith, ferocious faith pursues the giant, it doesn't run from it. And can I tell you, man, I just believe this. The church today needs Christians who are tired of running from their giants, who are tired of watching their giants ruin their life. And they're saying, you know what, giant, I'm not running anymore. The entire nation of Israel is trembling in their boots, looking at Goliath, shaking and being like, he's so big. We've got no hope. David was like, no, hold on a second, Goliath, you might scare everybody else, but I'm standing right here and I'm not running from you. Can I ask you today, how long are you going to allow the giant in your life to ruin your family or your marriage or your finances? How long are you going to run from it? Man, the church today needs Christians who will look the giant in the face and say, I might have ran in the past, but today I'm not moving. I'm not running anymore. It's exactly what David declared to Goliath. Hey, you know what? You might scare everybody else, but you don't scare me. Because God's given me victory in the past. I've defeated a lion and a bear, and you will be the same. And you want to know why David could say that today? You want to know why we can say that today? It's because of verse 37. David says this, he says, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. You see, David understood one really powerful thing, is when he stood in that bear's face, when he turned and he looked at Goliath, he knew he wasn't alone in the battle. You see, David's faith realized that he couldn't, but God could. And it's the same thing today. Your faith needs to realize you can't win the battle, you can't defeat the giant, but God can. Faith realizes you can't, but God can. And I just know that David stood and he said, the God who rescued me from the lion and the bear will surely rescue me from this giant today. He stood on the truth that God was going to be with him in the battle, that he was going to fight side by side with him. And so the battle began. Verse 48, it says this. It says, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle lines to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and he struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and fell face down on the ground. And just for a second, imagine this scene. Both armies are facing each other. You have the Philistines and the Israelites. They're ready for battle. And out of the line steps Goliath, this giant of a man, this warrior who's undefeated. He's a champion. And you can almost just hear the whole Philistine army chanting and banging their swords and stomping their feet, and they're chanting, Goliath, Goliath, Goliath. They could taste victory because they've seen it before. Goliath had defeated champion after champion. This was their moment where they conquer Israel. And here on the other side is the nation of Israel, trembling in fear, wondering who's going to fight their battle. And out steps this 13-year-old boy. And I want to pause here for a second, and I just want to speak to our teenagers. Man, don't ever allow someone to tell you you're too young to do something great for God. Because here is a boy who might be even younger than you, standing in the face of the giant, and you can see the Israelites thinking like, wait a second, this is who we chose to go up against the giant? Wait, this was our best solution to defeat Goliath? And you can almost see them beginning to step back, getting ready to retreat. Even Goliath was like, wait a second, you brought a boy to fight me? Like this is the greatest soldier you have in all of your army, Israel, is a boy? And so Goliath attacks. David grabs his sling and he throws a stone right in the middle of Goliath's forehead. And boom, down goes the giant. You know, as I read this story, I think for a lot of us, this story motivates us, causes us to be passionate because we want to be David. I want to be David. Like, I want to destroy a giant. But the problem is I don't think you or I were ever intended to be David in this story. You see, we're not the hero. In fact, you know where we belong? In the corner with Israel trembling. Because this story reminds me of a greater story. David reminds me of a greater character in Jesus. You see, there was a moment in our lives where we had a giant that we couldn't defeat. It was our sin. And because of that sin, we trembled in fear, praying that there would be someone or something that could help us, that could win the battle that we had no chance or desire of fighting. And then Jesus stepped in and he defeated our giant. See, some of you today, you're saying, man, I want ferocious faith. I want to step out in faith. But you got to understand, faith that conquers, faith that overcomes begins in the one who overcame. You see, today, the starting point for your faith journey is by you saying, you know what? I need to place my faith and my trust in a God who overcame my greatest giant, a giant I had no chance of defeating. It's by surrendering your faith and putting your life in the hands of Jesus. That's where faith begins. Faith that overcomes begins in the one who overcame. But for a lot of us, you're saying, I've done that. I've surrendered my life to Jesus, but I'm facing, I want today to take a step of faith. Today I feel like God is calling me to do something great, but how do I battle through the resistance that I'm going to encounter? How did David win the battle with the resistance that he encountered from his brother and from Saul? Hebrews chapter 12 says this. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. Today, you want to know how you overcome the resistance of your faith? Hebrews gives you two things to do. The first one, it says, throw off everything that's going to hold you back. Throw it off. And I would tell you today to examine your life, to take a good, hard look at your life, not your wife's life, not your kids' lives, but your life. Take a good, hard look at who you are as a person, as a follower of Christ. And I want you to look for two things specific. The first thing is I want you to look for the sin that easily entangles you. I want you to look for the sin that is choking your faith, that it's strangling, it's holding it back. What sin today are you hiding that no one else knows about? Maybe sin that you're just choosing to be involved in every single day that is hindering your faith. Hebrews says, throw it off, get rid of it. The second thing I want you to look for is the people in your life that are holding your faith back. You You see, David encountered two persons that challenged his faith. The first was his brother, and the second was Saul, where they're like, David, you can't do this. And how many people in your life today that are surrounding you are pushing you out of your comfort zone, are encouraging you to take that step of faith, and yet I wonder how many people in your life are holding you back from it. This doesn't make sense. You shouldn't do that. That's crazy. Examine, take a good look this week at your life. What sin is holding you back and what people are holding you back. Hebrews says, throw them off. Get rid of them. But it also gives you a second thing to do. It says, fix your eyes on Jesus. The second thing I tell you to do is to relocate your eyes. Here's what I know about giants today, because I've encountered many in my life. And we just have a tendency when we're facing a giant in our life is all we do is we stare at the giant. We stare at the bills we can't pay. We stare at our spouse who doesn't take care of our needs. We stare at the things our kids are involved in. We stare at the addiction we can't break. We stare at the giant. Israel did this. I mean, they were all trembling because they were looking at Goliath thinking, oh my word, he's so big and we can't win this battle. They were staring at the giant. And I don't think your eyes were ever intended to look at the giants in your life. You see, David wasn't afraid of Goliath because I don't think David ever really gave Goliath a good glimpse. I don't think David looked at Goliath and like, man, he is big. What am I thinking? No, David's eyes were way above Goliath. He was staring at Jesus. And we have to relocate our eyes off the giant in our life and put our eyes on Jesus because it allows us to do two things. The first thing it allows us to do is it allows our faith to define our circumstances, and it doesn't allow our circumstances to define our faith. I think we have it backwards today. I think we've kind of turned this around because we stare at our giant and we're like, oh, my marriage is too broken, my finances are too broken, my kids are too broken, and we allow the circumstance to define where our faith should be, and it's never intended to be that way. It's amazing as you look at Jesus, how small your giant seems to get. Stop looking at the giant and start looking at the giant killer. Because it will allow your faith to determine your circumstances, not the other way around. The second thing it does is it allows us to accomplish things we never thought possible. You know, I just believe this today. For some of you, your giant feels impossible. You're staring at the facts. And the facts say your marriage is broken. The facts say your kids are messed up. The facts say that your finances are too far gone. The facts say that your giant is just too big. It's impossible, Drew. You don't understand, Drew. You don't understand where I'm at. You don't get it, Drew. You haven't walked in my shoes. You don't understand how broken my circumstances are. You don't get it. You don't realize how big my giant has become. It's impossible to fix. And I would ask you today, where is your faith? Because all of Israel thought the exact same thing when they watched a 13-year-old boy stand in front of the giant. Vegas said it was 1,000,000 to 1 odds that he won. Everybody thought David could not win the fight. But I don't know about you, but today I believe in a God today who is able to conquer the impossible. And today, I really believe this for you through your faith. And it doesn't have to come today with this huge giant leap where you're standing in front of your giant saying, let's battle. No, it comes through small steps of faith. And as we throw off the things that are hindering us, as we throw off the sin and the people that are holding us back, and we get our eyes off the giant onto Jesus through our faith, just like God rescued David from Goliath. I believe this. Through your faith, he wants to rescue you from your giant. Let's pray. Lord, I know in my life there are circumstances all the time that I feel like I can't win the battle. And God, I just believe that today, that there are some people who are struggling today because there's a giant in their life and they're looking at it and they're staring at it and they're wondering, will this ever go away? And God, I prayed today that you'd give us faith that conquers, ferocious faith that is tired of running from the giant, that is tired of watching the giant ruin our relationships and our families and our marriages and our finances. And I pray today that somebody, even if it's just one person today, as they walk out of this door, says, I'm going to stand in who God has made me to be, and I'm tired of running from the giant. I'm going to face it, and every day I'm going to take a small step of faith to win this battle. So I pray that you be with us, God, as we make those decisions. In Jesus' name, amen.